The 357 Supercode, KT.
Yes.
Seeing your phenomenal presentation on Black Magic 363. Shout out to the great brother Rich.
Oh yeah, shout out to
man.
him.
Seeing how these people in Silicon Valley are applying Masonic rituals and systems towards this thing. What is this 357 Supercode, and how does this connect to Masonry as well?
Right. So 357 is very interesting when it comes to Masonry, because when you enter into Masonry, it's one of the first codes or algorithms you learn. 357 has some real philosophical meaning, but it also has some real meaning too, because in Masonry, you have speculative Masons and you got operative Masons. And speculative is like more of the ones that are practicing in a lodge, doing the rituals and everything in the world, while operative Masonry is building. You know, they talk about Jesus being a carpenter, right? You talk about Solomon's temple being a temple or a structure that is built. So this is active Masonry happening in real time, right? Now, in order to build a sound structure, there's a code called 345. And 345 is a equation by what called the Pythagorean theorem, right? It's also called the 47 problem of Euclid, right? Where the sum of the two sides of a hypotenuse triangle, which is where there's a long slanted side, kind of like a jump, like when you see people doing tricks,
dirt bikes
and everything like that.
Yeah.
You see that ramp. That's the word, the ramp, right?
Yeah.
That ramp essentially is a triangle where you have a very long side and then you have these other two sides, right? The base and the side. The long ramp, that diagonal side, is the equivalent of the two other sides. And we get this from ancient Kemet with Heru, Aset, and Asor. Because when you combine the father and the mother, you get the child, right? So the sum of the two parents equates to the child. So the sum of the two sides equate to the hypotenuse, which is Heru. So it's 345. And when you take those sides and you put a square, you make a square out of each one of those sides. One of them is a 3x3 square. The other one is a 4x4 square. And the other one is a 5x5 square. So these are all squared numbers, right? A squared, B squared, C squared, right? So this is the math that's used to build temples. When you see these amazing ancient Kemetic structures, ancient Chinese structures, ancient Sumerian structures, ancient Olmec Maya structures, ancient Peruvian, South American structures, African structures from all over the world, Tartarian structures, right? Moorish structures, they are sound. They last for eons. They are essentially time speaking to you. It's like an artistic representation of time, right? Through these beautiful structures that are made, and they follow sacred geometrical patterns. But one of the main patterns that they follow is that 345. Solomon's temple was based on the 345. And Solomon's temple is synonymous with the mind, with the brain. And we house one of the most advanced structures and technologies within inside of our skull that is able to interface interdimensionally to pull in thoughts and process things and bring things in this world in order to create it. That's what our brain is able to do. And in order to build this brain, it had to follow certain codes to do so. And 345 is just one of those codes that are utilized in order to build a sound structure. Now, when you build a structure, we're talking about foundation, walls, roof. It's pretty much box, rectangle, right? But you need stairs, you need windows, you need doors. You need these things to be built in ratio to the entire system so that entropy drops and that there's order established and this structure is sound and energy can pass through it easily, just great conduction. And this is where the 357 comes in, because that ratio is the winding staircase. The 3-step, 5-step, 7-step. It also has to deal with the youth, the adolescent, and the elder as well. It has different meanings, those three numbers, but from a Masonic standpoint of building and structure, it's now building the steps. So with Willow, or the quantum computational world, dealing with like metaverse, AI, building a world, so to speak, it's one thing to just have infinite space, like the construct in Matrix. Imagine if Morpheus couldn't say guns or couldn't say load up this program, and they just stayed in that white space. You'd go crazy. Yeah. It's like being in a white room. That's why they had them in the asylums, for people to go crazy, because just being in a white room where you can't even see the corners or anything, you will go insane. Yeah. So after having infinite space, you need to know how to build out that space. Mm-hmm. And that's where the 357 comes in. Yeah. And them using 357 to reduce their error code, right, is just, you can see how that parallel next to being able to use it to reduce error code and building a structure, because that's what it's there for. So I find it quite interesting that out of all numbers that was used, they could use any combination of numbers. They used the 357.
KT, hearing that, right, I think about in the Bible, again, Jacob's ladder. Yes. Do you think that this somewhat mimics human DNA, potentially?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Jacob's ladder is definitely dealing with DNA. The 357 is definitely dealing with DNA, because we're getting into the winding staircase. Mm-hmm. And our DNA is a winding staircase. Yeah. You know, it's a double helix where there's an axis in the middle, but the strands and the steps rotate around that axis almost into infinity. Mm-hmm. The steps are the bases, you know, that's the code. And then we got sugars and phosphates on the outside. And similarly, how that DNA is, each one of those nitrogenous bases, after a particular length, you have what you would call a nucleic acid, right? These are what you call genes, which you would parallel to files on a hard drive or on a computer. And just like you pull files in order to do things, we pull genes in our body in order to do things. This is more order to the system. You are trying to create a infinite convergence or an infinite divergence. Infinite convergence is essentially being able to spiral down into almost nothingness, but it never collapses. So it's infinitely condensing into the smaller and smaller spaces. So if you shrink down to a nano scale, it'll still be as elaborate as a room that you're sitting in with air and everything like that on that scale. And it also infinitely expands. It infinitely diverges. This is the same as magnetism and electricity, where you got convergence and you got divergence. So centripetal, centrifugal, torus, hyperboloid. It's the same principle going on here. Yeah. So you want to be able to build that space out. And DNA is one of the most amazing means of our body being able to consolidate 6 feet now. We got 6 feet of DNA in each cell.
That's a lot of information.
Trillions of cells. Every one of those cells, if you pull the DNA out of just one, it's as tall as a 6-foot man, right? And then you multiply those DNAs over and over again, and you got enough DNA to stretch the Milky Way, just in you. Now, that is amazing storage capacity based on some type of code. So if they can understand how the body is storing it on that level, and they apply that to the computers and to the digital world, then yeah, they'll be able to flesh out an entire world seamlessly, because they are mimicking nature in order to do so. Yeah.
Mimicking nature, right? Before we even started filming, I had to tell you that presentation, it was amazing. And the willow tree, right? I thought about the film Avatar.
Yes.
You had mentioned that as well, man. I know that when people choose brands and choose names and programs, it's all by choice. Why do you think that they chose the willow and then the willow tree?
Well, it's interesting because the other quantum trip is called sycamore. That's another tree, and the reason why is because, remember, we started this thing talking about time, right? When you cut a tree down and you look at the stump, what's in that stump? What does
you can see like all the prints from like the roots, things like that. You can see like it could be hollow.
If you want to know the age of that tree,
you have to
count the rings.
It's the rings. Yeah.
So there's rings inside a tree.
That's right.
And just by cutting a tree and counting the rings, you'll know how old that tree is.
That's right.
So think of all that information stored in something almost two-dimensional, because you cut the tree, you're looking at the stump, and now you just count from the center out, and based on how many rings it is, now you can find out how old the tree is, and now you can start applying that information to all types of other things of that environment and know more about that environment just from counting rings. In addition to that, trees are essentially in superposition themselves, because their roots are deep in the underworld. We don't know what's going on with them roots. They are beyond our scope of understanding with our eyes. We see soil, grass, and then there's stuff going on down there. Trunk, and then it reaches up into the heavens where once again we cannot reach. But it's processing the information from the ground, and it's processing the information from on high. And then it also looks exactly like our lungs. The one thing that really matters in this dimension, which is breath. You see, so them recognizing all of those powers and abilities that the tree has and imbues, they want to make sure that what they're stamping has that type of power where it can dig into other realms, where it can facilitate not just on and off, but superposition, and then it being a willow trees are very interesting because it has a history in the drug game. So we know when you talk in Silicon Valley, where they getting that money from?
Great question.
Where is the quantum computation is really being used to develop drugs, right? So we have a term called in vivo, and we got a term called in vitro in science, right? So in vivo means that the studies that was made was actually from a live human body, right? In vitro means that the studies was made outside the body, like in a Petri dish or something. Now they have in silico, meaning that now they're running probability equations in a computer by feeding it info, so the computer can dictate, oh, this is how this molecule can dock on this type of tissue. This how long the molecule will last. This is how much of this molecule the body can take before this system breaks down. So using a regular computer to do that, it's going to take a lot of time for them to keep running through each one of these drills. But if you're using superposition with a quantum computer, right? Thinking of a willow tree where you have one tree, all these branches, and all the branches hang and they're parallel to one another. They all look the same. So it's visually, it looks like a superposition where it's all of these different paths, but you're looking for the perfect path, right? And then just thinking about parallel realities in itself, where you're dealing with a tree, but from that tree, you have all of these timelines and existences that exist from this one tree that exist next to each other, that are parallel to one another, and the wind can blow and they can cross and they can overlap. So this tree is just symbolically able to provide them with a great visual archetype connected to their principles and what they're gearing up to do.
For sure.
Why
is quantum computing so important, KT? Because we'll have some of our people like, bro, that tech stuff is way over my head. But why is us just having a general understanding about this, about these activities, these studies, the research, why is this important for us as well?
Oh, well, it's important for us because we want to get to the finish line as well.
Yeah.
There's too much of us getting left in the dust. And then even when we are interested in doing things, they're on the very low level. Like there's a play called Hamilton, right? I love that play. You know what I'm saying? And they got a song in there called In the Room Where It Happens. You want to be in the room where it happens, the room where it happens. Like you want to be in the room where it happens. You don't want to be wondering what's going on. You don't want to assume what's going on. And just thinking of that makes me think of where superposition actually stemmed from. It came from a thought experiment called Schrodinger's cat. So and this is how Kemet comes into effect in all the time with Basset and cats and Sekhmet. But it's a cat that gave birth to the understanding of superposition. So the thought experiment is there's a box. And in this box, there's a timer and there's a vial of poison, right? So you put the cat in the box, you close the box. After a certain amount of time, there's a certain amount of poison released. After too much time, enough poison is released, the cat dies. If you walk up on that box, is the cat alive or is the cat dead? You don't know at that point. The poison might not have been enough where it killed it yet versus it could have been enough and the cat's dead, but it's a closed box. You can't see in there. So because you can't see in there and you don't know, that means that cat is both alive and dead until you measure it, until you observe it, remove the lid and look inside. Now you can see if the cat's alive or not. And that's Schrodinger's cat. Gotcha. So how does that, why do we need anything like that? Because all these things are doing is dropping entropy or decreasing the amount of time before you get to something. You want to sustain efficiency, make sure things are very efficient, but you want to cut down the time so you can get more things done in less time, as opposed to running out during the day from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. at night, running all these errands, working and stuff. What if you stayed home and you was able to do that same amount of stuff in 45 minutes? Now you could use your day grounding, walking in the park, painting, building something, gardening, traveling, doing anything else to build your internal quantum structure, because our body is based on quantum mechanics as well.
Time management, right, KT?
Yes.
That's what it comes down to in life.